Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 162, Vampires and Vampirism. Of course, a topic people have wanted me to do more on those topics. I want to write my own sort of little treatise on the folklore from my perspective. It's something, look at the shirt. It's of interest to me. Link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon, second and third links to my books, blogs. I think there's one other work if I remember correctly, that actually mentions vampirism. And then there's like the Book of Werewolves, some of the other semi-cryptozoological material. Next literary release of the day, 163, Asame's Demonology. So, a lot of the sort of cryptozoological side lately. I'm interested in this topic. The problem is that if you take a look at the literature in the modern sense on vampires, a lot of it is either focused solely on the literary side, literally studying other literature, or it's just about sort of the pan-Southeastern European sort of ways of looking at it. This particular work, though, actually goes into some similar cryptozoology, you could term it, or at least folklore, with regards to Asia. You would think of some of the creatures in the Philippines and Thailand and some of these areas. They have a lot in common with the European style of vampire. It also looks at Russian lore. In fact, in Russian lore, there's a similar creature, the name escapes me because, in Russian, actually wanders around in the day in order to try to, strangulate and suck the blood of people, as opposed to vampires primarily coming out at night in most cultures, night being spooky. And in Russia, I guess it's so spooky in your little commie block town that the vampires wander around during the day. Just a joke there, but kind of. It's very interesting. It's much more in-depth than some, and it also treats on Bram Stoker, and the funniest thing, I put this in the description of the book because it was so funny, because this shows the age of this particular book, the Vampires and Vampirism book. It mentions Bram Stoker's Dracula, which came out less than 20 years before this book was written. It says, oh, an exciting modern romance. And I thought to myself how funny that is, because it's funny because for a long time Dracula was not seen as really romantic. It gets on the silver screen in the Nosferatu days, it's like, oh, horrifying and stuff. It really isn't until the 90s version, actually fairly recently, that with Annie Lennox no less doing the soundtrack, that it really picks back up and becomes the romance it really was initially meant to be. It's a Victorian Gothic-style dark romance with a hell of a lot of sexual symbolism, and it's very funny. This work doesn't get into the sex symbolism as much. It's more naive because of its era. That was a taboo subject. Instead of wanting to privately print 10 copies at a loss, they decided to go mainstream, I guess, and not do that with this particular publisher. Probably a good idea from a marketing standpoint, if nothing else. But it goes into multiple cultures. It is quite interesting. It can be funny at times. It also talks about decomposition a lot. Because you've got to remember, even when this was written, early 1900s, the process of decomposition was not as entirely understood as it is today. For instance, we now know if you take a body and semi-embalm it, and put it in a box in the cold ground, yes, indeed, months later, under those refrigerated circumstances, it won't be fully decayed. Yes, it can still be juicy, so to speak. It's not really blood, it's like bacterial sludge, but it's there and it's still pliable to some degree. Yes, hair and nails appear to grow. It's really about the shrinking back of tissue after the first few days, but it can look like that. In some cases, someone's buried alive. There are going to be claw marks in their coffin. Sounds like, oh, people see weird stuff lately. Oh, we think it's coming from this grave. They dig it up. The person had been buried alive. Oh my God, it's a vampire. They take its heart out and burn it. It also goes into some of the lore about how to destroy vampires, burying it at crossroads, locking up the casket with iron bars, putting a person's arms like this, making the sign of the cross. That was one of the initial regions. That and the fact that it's more efficient than having him at the sides, I guess, maybe, or something. And various other methods. Apparently, stuffing the mouth with garlic was seen helpful. Again, and it wasn't just, in modern lore, it's like, hey, you take this stake and you pound it into the vampire's heart. The initial lore has a much longer stake being driven all the way through them in the coffin to root them to the ground, to literally keep them from rising. Literally, that poor vampire is still struggling to get out, but they can't because there's a big-ass iron spike through their chest. It's very, very funny indeed. So it's a very, very good work. It touches briefly on tuberculosis, the witchcraft scare, but it's really more about slightly older lore than that. And it does cover the fictional side of it at the time, with a little bit of a nod to humor at times as well. Excellent work, highly recommended. It isn't often that I edit a work that fully engrosses me. I'm always interested in them, or I wouldn't edit them in the first place. This is one of the maybe 1 in 20 works or something that I've edited that is actually fully entertaining enough so that as I'm going through it, I'm rereading parts of it just to absorb it a little more. That's why I seem more peppy when I'm making the, the review of it right here. Again, link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon, second and third links to my books, blogs. Again, extremely highly recommended. I will be making, at some point in the next year, 2 more categories in literature. One of them will be cryptozoology. I have enough works now between this, Assamese Demonology, Book of Werewolves, some of these others. I can make a new category, take pressure off some of the others. That's the maximum that you can fit on a blog without it looking crappy, is 12 categories in the format that I use. I'm not, at this point in the game, I'm not changing formats. That's about all. Peace out.